The humid air of the Ayadrang Valley hung heavy over the American troops in November of 1965. Sudden cracks of gunfire erupted from the dense elephant grass, shattering the silence. It was not the rhythmic thud of heavy machine guns, but a distinct staccato popping sound that every soldier would soon learn to fear. This was the sound of the enemy weapon, a rifle that could endure mud, water, and sand without jamming. While American troops struggled with their complex rifles, the North Vietnamese forces advanced with a weapon that seemed unstoppable. The battle for the Ayadrang Valley was about to reveal a terrifying new reality of modern warfare, where technology and simplicity clashed in the jungle. At stake was not just the survival of the 1st Cavalry Division, but the entire philosophy of Western military dominance. The United States had entered the conflict with superior air power and advanced technology, believing that precision engineering would guarantee victory. However, they faced an adversary equipped with a firearm that defied the conventional wisdom of gunsmithing. This weapon was loose-toleranced, rugged, and mass-produced in numbers that staggered the imagination. If the American soldier could not trust his rifle to fire in the heat of battle, the technological edge of the superpower would vanish. The outcome of the Cold War began to hinge on the reliability of the infantryman primary tool. The man responsible for this shift in global power was not a high-ranking general or a formally educated engineer from a prestigious university. He was a young tank mechanic named Mikhail Kalashnikov, recovering in a Soviet hospital in 1941. Wounded during the Battle of Bryansk, he listened to fellow soldiers complain about their unreliable rifles, while the German invaders touted their superior automatic weapons. Lying in his hospital bed with a shoulder injury, Kalashnikov felt a burning desire to create a weapon that would protect his motherland. He began to sketch designs on scrap paper, dreaming of a submachine gun that would drive the fascists from Russian soil forever. The Soviet Union was desperate for a solution to the overwhelming firepower of the German army. The standard-issue Mosin Nagant bolt-action rifle was reliable but slow, and the submachine guns lacked range. Mikhail Kalashnikov observed that the Germans were deploying a new type of weapon, the Sturmgewehr 44, which bridged the gap between a rifle and a submachine gun. He realized that the future of warfare lay in this intermediate cartridge, which allowed for controllable automatic fire. Despite his lack of formal training, his intuitive understanding of mechanics impressed the Soviet authorities. They transferred him to a weapons design bureau, where he could refine his rough sketches into working prototypes. Working conditions in the Soviet design bureaus were harsh, and the pressure was immense as the war raged on. Mikhail Kalashnikov faced stiff competition from established designers like Alexei Sudayev, who had already produced successful weapons for the Red Army. The initial designs Kalashnikov produced were rejected for being too complex or expensive to manufacture. However, he possessed a relentless determination and a willingness to listen to the soldiers who would use the weapons. He focused on simplicity and durability, ensuring that the gun could be stripped down and cleaned without special tools. He knew that in the freezing Russian winter, a complicated mechanism would be a death sentence. By 1947, the Second World War had ended, but the Cold War was just beginning. The Soviet military announced a new competition for an assault rifle that would fire the new 7.62mm cartridge. Mikhail Kalashnikov submitted his latest design, which featured a gas-operated mechanism and a rotating bolt. The weapon was known as the Automat Kalashnikov Model 1947, or simply the AK-47. During the grueling trials, the rifle was dragged through sand soaked in mud and fired continuously until the barrel glowed red-hot. It outperformed every competitor, proving that it could function in the most extreme conditions imaginable. The genius of the AK-47 lay in its loose tolerances and generous gaps between moving parts. Unlike Western weapons, which were built with tight precision to maximize accuracy, the Kalashnikov was designed to rattle. This allowed dirt, carbon, and debris to be pushed aside by the cycling mechanism rather than causing a jam. It was a weapon built for the illiterate conscript who might never clean his rifle properly. The Soviet leadership recognized the brilliance of this approach and officially adopted the rifle in 1949. Mikhail Kalashnikov was awarded the Stalin Prize and became a hero of the Soviet Union. Mass production of the AK-47 proved to be a significant challenge for the Soviet industrial machine. The early models utilized a stamped sheet metal receiver which was lighter and cheaper, but the technology was not yet perfected. A high rejection rate forced the factories to switch to a milled receiver machined from a solid block of steel. This made the weapon heavier and more expensive, but it ensured the robust quality that the military demanded. For several years, the Soviet Union kept the new rifle a closely guarded secret, issuing it only to elite units. Western intelligence agencies were aware of rumors, but had little concrete evidence of the new capability. As the 1950s progressed, the Soviet engineers finally mastered the art of metal stamping. This led to the introduction of the AKM, or the modernized automatic Kalashnikov, in 1959. This version was significantly lighter and cheaper to produce than the milled variant, allowing for production on a massive scale. The Soviet Union began to export the technology to its satellite states and allies, sharing the blueprints with nations like China and Poland. Factories sprang up across the Eastern Bloc, churning out millions of rifles. The philosophy was simple: quantity has a quality all its own. The proliferation of the Kalashnikov rifle fundamentally changed the dynamics of the Cold War. The Soviet Union did not just export weapons, they exported the means of production. They built factories in friendly nations and provided technical advisors to ensure quality control. This meant that the AK-47 was no longer just a Russian weapon, it was a global franchise. From the rice paddies of Asia to the deserts of the Middle East, the silhouette of the curved magazine became a symbol of Soviet influence. It empowered insurgencies and revolutionary movements, giving them the firepower to challenge established governments. The first major test of the AK-47 against Western weaponry occurred during the Vietnam War. The United States military arrived with the M14 rifle, which was heavy and difficult to control in automatic fire. They soon replaced it with the innovative M16, a futuristic weapon made of plastic and aluminum. However, the early M16 suffered from catastrophic reliability issues in the humid jungle environment. American soldiers were found dead with their rifles disassembled in front of them, having failed to clear a jam in their final moments. The contrast with the rugged Kalashnikov used by the Viet Cong was stark and demoralizing. Reports from the battlefield indicated that American troops were sometimes discarding their own weapons to pick up captured AK-47s. The enemy rifle could be buried in mud for weeks, dug up and fired immediately. This reliability created a psychological advantage for the North Vietnamese forces, who knew their equipment would not fail them. The Pentagon was forced to launch a congressional investigation into the failure of the M16, leading to significant modifications. Meanwhile, the reputation of the Kalashnikov as the ultimate soldier weapon was cemented in the minds of military strategists worldwide. While the Americans struggled to fix their rifles, the Soviet Union continued to flood the world with Kalashnikovs. The weapon became the great equalizer, allowing a peasant with a few hours of training to kill a professional soldier. It was the perfect tool for the proxy wars that defined the era. In Africa, revolutionary leaders like Che Guevara and Nelson Mandela were often photographed with the weapon. It became a symbol of anti-colonial struggle and liberation, appearing on propaganda posters and murals. The distinct banana-shaped magazine was instantly recognizable, representing resistance against Western imperialism. The cultural impact of the AK-47 extended far beyond the battlefield. In Mozambique, the rifle was so instrumental in their war for independence that they placed it on their national flag. It remains there to this day, crossed with a hoe and a book symbolizing defense, agriculture, and education. This was a unique honor for a piece of military hardware, illustrating how deeply the weapon was integrated into the national identity. For many nations in the developing world, the Kalashnikov was not just a gun, it was the key to their sovereignty and a guarantor of their freedom. However, the ubiquity of the weapon also had a dark side that began to emerge in the 1970s. The simplicity that made it ideal for conscripts also made it perfect for child soldiers and terrorists. The Black September group used Kalashnikovs during the massacre at the Munich Olympics in 1972, bringing the terror of the weapon into living rooms across the world. The rifle became the weapon of choice for hijackers, drug cartels, and warlords. Its low cost and wide availability meant that it fueled conflicts long after the original political causes had faded away. Mikhail Kalashnikov watched the spread of his invention with mixed emotions from his home in Izhevsk. He had designed the rifle to defend his country, not to fuel global terrorism or criminal violence. He was treated as a national treasure in the Soviet Union, living a comfortable life, but he received no royalties for the millions of rifles produced. He often stated that he slept soundly knowing he created the weapon for defense. Yet as he saw the rifle in the hands of criminals and thugs on the news, a shadow of regret began to creep into his public statements. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 presented a bitter irony for the legacy of the AK-47. The Soviet army, equipped with the latest AK-74 variant, faced Mujahideen fighters armed with Chinese and Egyptian-made AK-47s. For the first time, the weapon was being turned against its creators in a large-scale conflict. The CIA purchased hundreds of thousands of Kalashnikov clones to supply the Afghan resistance. Soviet conscripts found themselves under fire from the very design that was meant to protect them. It was a brutal demonstration of how the weapon had escaped Soviet control. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 unleashed a new wave of Kalashnikovs onto the black market. Massive stockpiles of weapons from former Warsaw Pact nations were sold off to the highest bidder. Prices plummeted in some regions, making an AK-47 cheaper than a live chicken. This flood of cheap weaponry fueled civil wars in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and the Balkans. The gun that had defined the Cold War was now defining the chaos of the New World Order. Arms dealers, famously known as the Merchants of Death, made fortunes moving these stockpiles across borders. In the post-Soviet era, Mikhail Kalashnikov finally had the opportunity to travel to the United States. In a historic meeting, he met Eugene Stoner, the designer of the American M16. The two men, who had armed opposing sides of the Cold War, found they had much in common. They bonded over their shared passion for engineering and the difficulties of military bureaucracy. They shot each other weapons at a firing range, acknowledging the strengths and weaknesses of their respective designs. It was a moment of reconciliation that symbolized the end of the great ideological struggle. Despite his celebrity status, Mikhail Kalashnikov lived a modest life in the city where his rifles were manufactured. He continued to work at the Izhmash plant well into his 80s, serving as a consultant. He was often asked if he felt guilty for the millions of deaths caused by his invention. He would usually deflect the blame to the politicians who started the wars. He argued that a gun is merely a tool, and it is the person who pulls the trigger who bears the moral responsibility. However, as he approached the end of his life, his tone became more reflective and somber. In the years before his death, Kalashnikov wrote a tortured letter to the Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church. He asked if he was responsible for the souls of those killed by his weapon, even if they were enemies. He expressed a deep spiritual pain and a fear that his invention had done more harm than good. The church replied that he had designed the weapon for the defense of his fatherland and was not to blame for how others used it. This exchange revealed the heavy burden that the old designer carried in his final days. Mikhail Kalashnikov passed away in 2013 at the age of 94. He was buried with full state honors as a hero of the Russian Federation. His legacy, however, remains complicated and pervasive. Estimates suggest that over 100 million Kalashnikov rifles have been produced, accounting for 1/5 of all firearms in the world. The weapon is still in production today in dozens of countries and remains the standard issue rifle for over 50 armies. Its silhouette is etched into the collective consciousness of humanity. The design of the AK-47 has proven to be timeless, outliving the empire that created it. Modern variants like the AK-12 continue to serve the Russian military, incorporating rails and optics while retaining the core mechanism. The internal action is so robust that it has been copied in rifles from Finland to Israel. The Galil and the Valmet are direct descendants of the Kalashnikov lineage, proving that good engineering transcends political boundaries. The concept of the intermediate cartridge assault rifle is now the universal standard for every modern military. The question of why the AK-47 became the dominant weapon of the 20th century has a simple answer. It was the perfect synthesis of form and function for the era in which it was born. It did not require a highly trained soldier or a sterile environment to operate. It accepted the reality of war, which is dirty, chaotic, and brutal. While Western designers chased the ideal of perfection, Kalashnikov chased the reality of reliability. In the mud of the trenches and the dust of the desert, reliability always wins. The iconic status of the rifle is also due to its aesthetic, which conveys a sense of raw power. The curved magazine, the wooden furniture, and the distinct front sight post create a silhouette that is aggressive and unmistakable. It has appeared in countless movies, video games, and rap songs, becoming a pop culture icon. It represents rebellion, strength, and a certain rugged individualism. For better or worse, the AK-47 has transcended its role as a tool of war to become a cultural symbol. In the hands of a freedom fighter, it represents liberation from tyranny and oppression. In the hands of a terrorist, it represents fear and indiscriminate violence. In the hands of a soldier, it represents the trust that his weapon will not fail him when he needs it most. The duality of the Kalashnikov is what makes its history so compelling. It is a mirror that reflects the conflicts and contradictions of the human race. It is a passive object that amplifies the intent of the user. The economic impact of the Kalashnikov cannot be overstated. It disrupted the global arms market, offering a cheap alternative to expensive Western weapons. It allowed poor nations to field armies that could challenge technologically superior foes. This democratization of firepower leveled the playing field in asymmetric warfare. It forced major powers to rethink their strategies and invest heavily in counterinsurgency tactics. The cheap stamped steel of the AK-47 cost the West trillions of dollars in military spending. As we look to the future of warfare, directed energy weapons and drones are beginning to dominate the conversation. Yet the Kalashnikov remains relevant in conflicts around the globe. It is likely that the AK-47 and its variants will continue to be used for decades to come. The sheer number of existing rifles ensures that they will circulate in conflict zones for generations. The steel and wood may age, but the design remains as effective today as it was in 1947. The story of the AK-47 is ultimately the story of the 20th century. It is a story of industrialization ideology and the devastating consequences of global conflict. It demonstrates how a single invention from a humble mechanic can alter the course of history. Mikhail Kalashnikov wanted to protect his borders, but he ended up arming the world. His name will forever be synonymous with the weapon that defined an era. From the frozen steppes of Russia to the humid jungles of Vietnam, the AK-47 has left an indelible mark on the earth. It has toppled governments, drawn borders, and ended countless lives. It is a testament to the power of simple engineering and the enduring nature of violence. As long as there are men willing to fight, there will be a need for a weapon that works. And for the last 70 years, that weapon has been the Kalashnikov. The legacy of the Cold War is often measured in walls that fell and treaties that were signed. But the physical legacy is made of steel and wood dispersed across every continent. The AK-47 is the artifact that refuses to be buried. It is a reminder of a time when the world was divided into two camps and proxy wars burned on the periphery. It serves as a warning that weapons once unleashed can never truly be recalled. In the end, the AK-47 is more than just a collection of parts. It is a phenomenon that reshaped the geopolitical landscape. It challenged the assumption that high technology is always superior. It proved that in the grim calculus of war, good enough is often better than perfect. The rifle that Mikhail Kalashnikov built in a moment of patriotic fervor became the most lethal instrument in human history. The sounds of the Ayadrang Valley have long since faded, and the jungle has reclaimed the battlefields. But the popping sound of the AK-47 can still be heard in conflicts today. It echoes in the mountains of Afghanistan and the streets of war-torn cities. It is the soundtrack of modern conflict, a grim reminder of our inability to resolve differences without violence. The ghost of the Cold War continues to haunt us one bullet at a time. We are left to ponder the weight of this invention. Is it a marvel of engineering or a curse upon humanity? Perhaps it is both. The Kalashnikov AK-47 is a tool that did exactly what it was designed to do. It functioned without fail in the hands of anyone who picked it up. In a world full of uncertainty, that terrible reliability is its most enduring legacy. As history marches forward, the AK-47 stands as a silent witness to the bloodshed of the last century. It is the iconic assault rifle that defined Cold War conflicts and changed the way wars are fought. It remains the most produced and most widely used firearm in history. And as long as war remains a part of the human condition, the Kalashnikov will be there ready to fire.